sometimes our life sails along very smoothly. Sometimes, we can be relaxed and not be worried about much of anything. And then there comes a day where something happens. We might have anticipated some of it, but we didn't anticipate all of it. And we are not really prepared for some of the things that happen. Some days are calm. Some things happen in our life just to keep life interesting for us. And they don't cause a lot of a concern, but they're just kind of everyday hassle. And then sometimes, as we said, it can be pretty sad, serious, terrifying. Just thinking of the history of COVID over this last 2 years plus. And most days we do all right. Other days we get suddenly afraid and very cautious. We wonder what God's plan is for us in the future when we think about COVID and that kind of thing, or our world problems. We think, are we going to survive this? We hear things on the news that scare us a little bit. Speaking of Pennsylvania, it's good to have Mike and family back, but I believe it's Pennsylvania that I heard on the news that they made a law making it punishable by, I think, 6 years in prison if you quote or read Genesis, because it makes our LGBTQ plus communities nervous, because it seems to attack same-sex marriages, that kind of thing. And you wonder where our good old country built on the biblical principles, where it's heading. Worries a little bit. Some are just real tangible troubles. Jesus said, in this life, you will have troubles. I mean, it could be anything that we've even kind of touched on today. The death of a family member, a loved one. Sickness that comes in some form, whether it's COVID or just other things. And sickness can be a big worry, especially if we have a frail system as we get older, and we just don't take care of ourselves like we ought. It could be some financial concern that you might have, like car rental, right, Jerry? Yeah, where rubber meets the road in our life, and it can be a big concern. Certainly, our relationship between us and other members of our family, or at work or school or what have you, some relationships can get very troubling. And we all have those relationships. Some of us with more concern than others. And all we can do is look at that and say, Jesus said, in this life you will have troubles. But he went on to say, be of good cheer. For I have overcome the world. Be of good cheer. I always think about Paul and his teachings where he says to rejoice in sufferings. That seems like a kind of a strange conundrum, if you will, where you got all this problem and yet you're supposed to rejoice in them, not because of them, but in them. And Jesus is saying in the scripture that we just read, be of good cheer. You got problems? Be of good cheer. And almost like he's saying, buck up, and face it, and go on with a smile. Almost sounds like he's saying that, doesn't it? Deal with it. You got problems? Jesus says, rejoice and deal with it. I was listening to one preacher on the radio, and I thought, boy, there's a challenge. And it's a kind of a good piece of advice for all of us if we kept a log for a month. Daily log, jotting down what God has done for you that day. Would be a good idea, because as the song says, count your blessings and see what God has done. Right? Count your blessings and see what God has done for you. Write it down, and then you can go back and review it. Gee, by the end of the month, you should have a legal size pad, maybe several of them, several sheets of that, filled with incidents where He protected you, He met a need that you have, and we normally kind of take all of that for granted. But if we jot them down, it will amaze us what God's done for us in that 30-day period. And that will teach you why, in fact, we should be rejoicing every day on what God has done in our lives. It's a way to stay in good cheer. In this life, you will have troubles, but be of good cheer. And then he goes on to say, for I have overcome the world. He's been there. Jesus has been there where you are in your trouble. I've been there, he says. I will never forsake you, he says. We see plaques on the wall, and I can still see the hallway at my mom's house, mom and dad's house, and it was full of Bible verses and slogans and pictures of Christ. I mean, wall to wall, down the hallway. And one of them, of course, is Christ is the answer. And we sing that, don't we? Christ is the answer to my every need. He is my friend indeed. Christ is the answer to my need. One other slogan said, prayer changes things. You've all seen those slogans somewhere, I'm sure. Even on the billboard of late, down at 70, Be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. I've been there, I've done that, and I made it. Without sinning, I made it. And he says, you can do the same thing. You can do the same thing. Prayer changes things. It's amazing. You know, and it depends a little bit on your faith. Our scripture today was a story of deep lesson, at least for me. I hope so for you too. Jesus had just gotten finished feeding the 5,000, preaching for a while. Then he told the disciples, let's get in the boat and cross over to the other side of the lake, the Sea of Galilee. And so they got in the boat, and they were rowing, or sailing, I would guess, and doing their jobs as sailors, taking that boat across the sea. And all of a sudden, the winds stirred up the waters, and a severe windstorm, to the point they were taking on water in the boat. And the guys, the disciples who were transporting Jesus across the sea, got really worried. And then it occurred to him, Jesus is back there in the boat, in the stern end of the boat, sound asleep. And they went out back and shook him and said, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to drown? And Jesus calmed the sea. And then he turned around to the disciples and said, O ye of little faith. O ye of little faith. You know, they forgot who the passenger in that boat was. It was God himself in that boat. God's not going to drown. And he's not going to drown those who believe in him. Yes, we may have troubles, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Jesus can calm the sea. He can make you well. He can solve your financial problems, concerns, whatever your need might be today. Christ is the answer to our every need. So we have to look at ourselves and say, why are we worried about it? What causes us to be afraid? And do we go running back to the person asleep in the back of the boat and say to them, don't you care that we're drowning in our problem? Are we that kind of a believer? Is our faith so weak that we even forget that Jesus is in the boat with us? God, the creator of the wind and rain, is asleep in the boat, but he's not asleep in terms of our needs and our lives. And if we just come to him, he can calm the sea. You know, they did have to go back there and kind of shake him and wake him up. But you see, that was God sitting there. That was God in the boat with them. And they had no need to panic or be alarmed, because God was in the boat with them. And Jesus pointed out to them, guys, you're my disciples. Where is your faith? So I ask us the same thing today. Don't forget who's in the boat with you. He said he'd never leave you or forsake you. He will take care of business, but you may have to ask him. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes he intercedes in your behalf without being asked. Because sometimes we do stupid stuff. I'm thinking of some of the drivers on the highway lately, just especially in when the snow and sleet and the freezing rain was out there, and they, driving like it's like today, you know. But if we ask him, if we put our faith and trust in him, and simply ask, Lord, help me. Lord, protect me. Lord, heal me. Lord, be with me. Now his answer may not always be, of course, calm the winds. It may not be immediate, but he will answer. Sometimes he says yes, sometimes he says no, because he knows better about our lives. And sometimes he says, not now, now's not the time. But he does answer, and he is the answer to our every need. So don't forget who's in the boat with you. Don't go to sleep spiritually. And don't forget who's in charge. God is. Where's your faith? Trust and obey. There is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Shall we turn in our songbooks to page 13?